What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, December 29th, 2017, last broadcast day of the year, 2017, our final show of the year here. So we're going to try and cover as much stuff as we can about last year, about the coming year. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Unfortunately, today, the Lady Claire will not be able to join us in hour number 3. She is still, unfortunately, under the weather. And I know you all miss her, and I miss having her on the show. Again, thank you for all the kind letters and expressions that she get better. And that's what she's working on right now. So we'll be looking after her. And after the radio show's over, I'm going to go back to taking care of her. All right, so getting on into it. Obviously, this is New Year's weekend, and a reminder that RBN will be broadcasting replay shows on Monday, but we will be back live on the air Tuesday, so keep that in mind. And it may seem superfluous, but there's always a need to put out a word of caution. It's New Year's. People have a tendency to overindulge in alcohol or other substances and get behind the wheel, so please be very, very careful about that. Now, obviously, with New Year's being a symbolic target, there's a lot of security. It's going to be around Times Square and also in Las Vegas out of concern that terrorists or somebody pretending to be terrorists might try and carry out some kind of an attack. So you may want to think very carefully about being in a public place. Here on Oahu, of course, they have banned real fireworks for ordinary people for a long time. When we first moved here, when Claire and I first moved here, you could buy for real fireworks. And you could get them on 4th of July, and you could get them on New Year's, and that was kind of a lot of fun. But unfortunately, over the years, as Hawaii gets more liberal, basically everything that's in the stores is a party popper. They try and make them look like the old fireworks, big long tubes or cones or anything, but in the end, you pull a string, you get some paper streamers, and that's it, which has not stopped the bootleggers from coming on in, and we can already tell from what we're hearing late at night. People can't wait till New Year's. They're playing with their fireworks. And in fact, it's so out of control. Earlier today on the radio, I was hearing an announcement on the news coming from the Hawaii Electric Company asking people who've got real fireworks to not allow them to direct anywhere near power lines or transformers. So apparently they've accepted that the people want fireworks, and what the people want, the people somehow or other are going to be getting. Now, Claire and I, we tend to keep our New Year's at home, but we do have a back porch that overlooks much of the south coast of Oahu, and there are going to be all kinds of fireworks shows at Waikiki and Aloha Tower and Hilton Hawaiian Village. So we'll be able to watch those in the distance as well, along with the illegals, which will be a lot closer. In fact, it was kind of interesting. When Claire was conducting the Christmas Eve choir for her church, somebody in the immediate vicinity was playing with their fireworks, and they were really very powerful. All right, let's get into the show now. We're going to start with a phone call. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. I'm calling in to regards of the executive order that was signed. It was pretty quietly signed last week about the asset freezing, and about the corruption thing.
Yes.
And about with Eric Schmidt with Google. I would love to know if Google Schmidt was on the Lolito Express or down to Lolito Island because he, resigned after the signing of this executive order. But do you feel that this executive order lays the groundwork for possibly going after Hillary with Uranium One and others?
Yeah, I mean, the executive order, if you actually read it, it's pretty broad. It basically says anybody involved in human rights abuses or anybody involved in corruption, their assets can be seized. And if implemented, it would be a very, very powerful tool. The question is, will it be implemented? Will it get past bureaucratic resistance? Because as I mentioned earlier in the week, just because the president signs an executive order does not necessarily mean it will be carried out. And the example I use of that, of course, is from President John F. Kennedy, who issued an executive order to take away covert paramilitary operations from the Central Intelligence Agency and hand them over to the Department of Defense, which would have been a tremendous weakening of CIA's power, and was evidently Kennedy's implementation of his promise that he was going to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. Because the CIA basically lied to him about the Bay of Pigs, about the degree of support that could be expected from the Cuban people, which was non-existent, and apparently somebody somewhere did leak the information, and Castro and the Cuban people were basically waiting for those Cuban brigades to come on shore at the Bay of Pigs, and it was an absolute humiliating defeat. So, just because Trump signed the EO doesn't mean it's going to happen. I'd love to see it happen, but right now, the more we get into the Uranium One deal, the more and more it looks like almost everybody inside the Beltway had a piece of that deal, had their finger in that particular pie, and they're going to be doing everything they can to protect that scandal, not because they like Hillary Clinton, but because they all got a little bit dirty from it.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I feel like this is the knot, and whenever you start pulling on the strings of this knot to unravel the knot, you know, you keep saying the Soviet-style collapse. I honestly feel like the Uranium One, when investigated and when everything actually comes out of it, you know, you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and I think that right there is going to cause federal government to collapse. I hate to say it, but I do feel that way. But it needs to happen.
Well, I'm seeing a collapse coming on, Soviet-style collapse. Ron Paul has now gone public. He believes exactly the same thing. More and more people are saying the United States federal government can't continue the way it's going without a collapse or suffering a major military defeat. As far as the Uranium One investigation, I'd like to see something coming out of it. But look at how many cover-ups the government is still maintaining, even though the general public is aware it's all lies and cover-up. And if there are enough people involved in the corruption from Uranium One, I don't see that anything will actually be done, because we're in a position of being forced to trust the fox to guard the hen house. And any government that's investigating itself is going to make sure the investigation comes out in the best possible outcome for the government and all the people who are in there.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. That's why I would like to see Larry Claimant with Judicial Watch, or the Tom Fitton. You know, have outside somebody, outside of D.C. do these investigations. We don't, as far as I'm concerned, the FBI, I call it the State Bureau of Investigation, and the CIA, Criminals in America, you know, I don't think that these organizations are even relevant anymore. I mean, they're obviously not working for the people, so why even have them?
I absolutely agree, and back when Harry Truman formed the CIA, even he at the time admitted it was a very dangerous thing to do, because throughout history, secret police organizations do have a tendency to go rogue. They tend to think they're really in control of everything, and they should be making the key decisions. But you're absolutely right. These agencies are not serving the American people. We now know that the FBI higher-ups were active participants in the cover-up of Hillary Clinton's email server scandal. And again, if my theory about what Hillary was doing with that server is correct, then all these top FBI officials are accessories to espionage.
Absolutely. Well, that's all I have for you, Mr. Mike. I wanted to do a little bit of high-octane speculation with you with this executive order. I hope something happens with it. I really do. But have a great rest of the show and have a great, wonderful day. And Miss Claire, I hope you're feeling better, and I hope you have a great day, too.
Well, thank you very much there. And unfortunately, executive orders, it doesn't matter how fancy the folder that holds them or who signs them or how it looks, it's still just a piece of paper. It isn't real until something is actually being done. So, Kevin, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go here, and we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, boy, has she put her foot in it this time. Now, this all goes back to this teacher, Jean-Marie Simon, who traded in all of her bonus miles to get a first-class seat on a flight from Houston to Washington, D.C. Actually, she was coming up from further away. It was just she had to stop over in Houston and change planes, but she had a first-class seat. And all of a sudden, the airline tells her her reservation is not in the system, and they give her an economy seat and a voucher. And in getting on the airplane, the teacher, Jean-Marie Simon, saw that Sheila Jackson Lee was sitting in the seat that Jean-Marie was supposed to be in first class. And Jean-Marie Simon apparently found out from somebody else that Sheila Jackson Lee likes to do this. She'll just go up to an airliner and she'll say, I want a first-class seat, and if first class is full, they'll kick somebody out for her, which is not really a good way to build customer relations. So Jean-Marie Simon got a picture of Sheila Jackson Lee sitting in her first-class seat. There was a bit of a confrontation with a flight attendant who threatened to remove the teacher from the flight for complaining about the fact that her first-class seat was taken away. And Sheila Jackson Lee and United Airlines have probably been well advised to leave it alone at that point. But Sheila Jackson Lee decided to up the ante and say that the only reason Jean-Marie Simon was complaining was because Sheila Jackson Lee is black and Jean-Marie Simon is white and obviously is a racist. So Sheila Jackson Lee, after basically stealing this woman's first-class seat, came on out trying to play the victim card and the race card. Oh, it's only because I'm a black woman. If I'd been white, she wouldn't have kicked up a fuss. Well, that just blew up in her face because it turns out Jean-Marie Simon is a well-known human rights activist. She's the author of Guatemala, Eternal Spring, Eternal Tyranny. And basically back in 2012, she donated 1,000 copies of her book to schools and universities in Guatemala to keep the truth of what happened down there alive. So Sheila should have just learned to keep her mouth shut because this is not going away. And I think most Americans are appalled at the idea that a member of Congress can just waltz on into an aircraft and kick people out of their seats. And Sheila Jackson Lee has this attitude, she's royalty. She was actually quoted at one point saying, I'm a queen and I'm going to be treated like a queen. No, Sheila, you're not. You're the elected representative of the people. Those people are your boss. And it's time to show a little respect. Now, down in Alabama, Roy Moore has filed a challenge against the election. He's trying to basically get a judge to issue a restraining order barring the Alabama Secretary of State from certifying the results of the election. And going on in there, talking about the rampant voter fraud, not to mention the smear job, the very obvious smear job. And the media is still calling him the accused child molester. That all blew up. But the corporate media's job is to sell the official story, and the official story is Roy Moore is bad, and and he deserved to lose his election. But there are indications of election fraud, and I think it's very important we get to the bottom of this. Of course, from the point of view of our political elites and the corporate media, their priority is to convince all you Americans that our elections are absolutely honest and above board. They don't want you even suspecting that the elections might be rigged, even though we got a college-level education in election rigging last year, courtesy of the Hillary Clinton campaign. They need you to believe. You must believe the elections actually mean something. Even though the Democratic National Committee during last year's primaries told the Democratic voters, no, what you want doesn't matter. We will decide who gets to be the leader. People are still looking into the Hillary Clinton money laundering in campaign finance, and the Committee to Defend the President has filed a Federal Election Commission complaint against the Hillary Clinton campaign, the Democratic National Committee, the Democratic state parties, and the Democratic mega donors for basically using those state chapters to evade campaign finance limits. And the total amount of money that went through this laundry is $84 million. That's probably the biggest single campaign finance violation in U.S. history. And it was illegal. They tried to find something that looked legal, but at bottom, no, it was illegal. It's money laundering. And it's another reason why Hillary should be wearing handcuffs right now. Now, House Intelligence Committee Chairman David Nunes is blasting the Department of Justice and the FBI for its failure to fully produce documents related to the famous, discredited Russian dodgy dossier. And Nunes is out there saying that at this point, it seems like the Department of Justice and the FBI need to be investigating themselves. I would correct that. They need to be investigated by an outside party, and I'm in agreement with our first caller. I would love to see Larry Klayman from Freedom Watch be appointed to handle this investigation, or Tom Fitton at Judicial Watch. They're doing really, really good work. And they are investigating from the outside, which makes it a little bit more difficult. But they're definitely making progress. But we dare not allow the government to investigate itself anymore. We've had too many times when the government investigated itself and came out with just another lie for the American people. Remember after TWA 800, and at first they were saying it was terrorists, shot it down, horrible terrorists. Then it came on out that the missile that hit that 747 came out of the middle of an ongoing naval exercise involving live fire testing of anti-missile systems. Well, at that point, the terrorists went away, and then the official story was, well, there were fuel vapors in a fuel tank that blew the airplane apart. And that didn't work either. But that's what happens when you have an official U.S. government investigation. You get the official U.S. government lie. This government does need to be investigated. It needs to be investigated by ordinary American citizens, which is a lot of what we here in the independent media are trying to do. But anybody who sits back and says, oh, the latest U.S. official government investigation has verified once again that the government is right and everybody else is wrong, you're living in a dream world. You're living in absolute denial. Now, over in New York, their Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, who is assisting Robert Mueller's investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, and so far they've both drawn a blank there, basically is boasting of his successful resistance to the Trump administration in a Tuesday Medium post. Now, Schneiderman, who could play an essential role in the disposition of Mueller's investigation, has effectively branded as a public anti-Trump litigator during the president's first year. So there is clear political bias at work here. Now, Tom Fitton is looking at all of this information, and he's saying that at this point the Robert Mueller investigation is now irredeemably compromised. And he's right. It was compromised right from the very start. It was not going to be an honest, unbiased, objective assessment of the facts. It was a witch hunt, and they've drawn a blank after almost a year and $7 million. The only indictments they got were for events completely outside the 2016 election, and by default, completely outside Robert Mueller's mission statement. So far, they have found zero evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, and yet the corporate media is still going on as if it's only a matter of time before they find, read, manufacture such compelling evidence. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, getting back on over to Judicial Watch, basically, Fitton is out there saying that there is a real ethical problem about Mueller using that anti-Trump Russian dossier, or Russia dossier, because it was a Clinton Democratic National Committee campaign document that was laundered into the Obama FBI. And word is, it was Senator John McCain who walked that over there and said, you guys got to look at this. And then, of course, it was used to obtain a FISA warrant to make it look like what they were doing, to spy on Trump and his associates, was quasi-legal, when it wasn't. You cannot get a valid warrant on the basis of fraudulent information. Now, apparently, one of McCain's associates has now been subpoenaed because supposedly he knows the dossier content sources. And here is the interesting thing. Everyone is trying out there, over at Robert Mueller and DOJ and FBI are out there trying to say that Trump was dealing with Russia. Trump was dealing with Russia. No, it was Hillary. And I don't just mean the Uranium One deal. Hillary and her representatives, they hired this guy, Christopher Steele, to go over to Russia and try and find information about Donald Trump. They're guilty of the crime that they're accusing Donald Trump of. Now, speaking again of Judicial Watch, apparently those documents from Anthony Weiner's laptop are starting to be posted over at the State Department's website. And unfortunately, the way they're being put up there, it's almost deliberately set up to make it very hard to search through the documents. But we've got millions and millions of Americans who are probably going to be going over to that website and taking a look. So it's only a matter of time before some of that stuff starts coming on out. The latest revelation in all of this skullduggery is that apparently just before former FBI Director James Comey testified to Congress, he had a secret meeting with Robert Mueller. Now remember, Comey and Mueller are buddy-buddy going back to their time together at the FBI. So there's clearly a conflict of interest there. And people are saying on this issue alone, Mueller should resign. Of course, Mueller is refusing to resign. Trump is supposedly considering firing him, and the liberal Democrats are threatening massive riots across the streets of America if Mueller is fired. They are that desperate to get Trump out of that White House. And I don't know who they think is going to go on in there, but I think it all comes down to the fact that all of these politicians inside Washington, D.C., in one way or the other, they're dirty. They're dirty with the Uranium One deal. They're dirty with the CIA's cocaine running. And they were convinced that Hillary would be the president and would maintain all the cover-ups so that they could go to bed at night and count their riches in peace. And it didn't work. We have a president who I think, when pushed, is going to want to do something about this. And even more worrisome, you've got the American people are starting to find out exactly the true nature of our government and what they're really doing. And what we are constantly told our government is doing is, of course, a fiction to keep us in our places, to keep us working, to keep us buying things at the shopping malls. And what our government is really doing is best seen out on those foreign battlefields in Yemen, and Iraq, and Syria, and Libya, and Afghanistan, and Niger, and Somalia, and probably a lot of places we don't even know yet. That's what our government is really doing. And it's time for the American people to confront it. Now, a lot of people are wondering if the Awans cut some kind of a deal. And this all centers on Imran Awan. He was arrested last July at Dulles Airport trying to flee the country after having wired $300,000 to Pakistan. And apparently, Awan's court date on the 4 counts related to bank fraud has disappeared from the court docket for January. It just went away. Did he make a deal? Is he going to turn state's evidence? Did somebody just say, we can't let this trial go any further, or it's going to rip the lid off a massive espionage operation inside the Congress itself? Because that was another aspect of this case a lot of people aren't talking about, that the Awan brothers had bugged a lot of computers of the members of Congress. So, and again, a scandal on that scale. The federal government would not survive it. If I'm right, and if Hillary was using her private email server to sell classified U.S. government documents to foreign interests, using her so-called charitable foundation to collect and launder the money, that too is a scandal that could bring down the entire government. It's very fragile right now. The American people don't trust the government. They don't believe the government. There are a lot of parallels between the United States right now and the Soviet Union just before it came apart. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And over the commercial break here, I went on over to the State Department's website, where all these documents from Huma Abedin, Anthony Weiner's laptop, are supposedly being posted. And every single search that I have run, including the searches being recommended by Judicial Watch, are coming up with 0 results. And even Judicial Watch is saying it would have been a lot easier if they'd simply turned the emails over to Judicial Watch and let them index it. But right now, as of this moment, every search I've run returns 0 results. So they may be posted there, but the search engine is not allowing you to hunt for them or find them. And that right there tells us that, yeah, there's something else being covered up over there. Alrighty, getting on back here to the issue of election fraud. Story that came out of Investment Watch blog. Apparently, George Soros, among his many other interests, if you will, owns or controls a voting technology company that runs 57,000 voting and counting machines in 307 jurisdictions in 16 states. If there's somebody who can swing an election at the press of a button, it appears to be George Soros. And again, in the context of when I was talking about Judge Roy Moore, the corporate media's job is to convince you the election system is perfectly honest and nobody could ever cheat it, despite what we saw all during last year's primary and general election. And wasn't it really funny during the campaign when Trump came up and said, we've got to be on guard against election fraud, and Obama came on out and said, no, it's impossible to rig our elections. The system is too complex. It's utter, complete nonsense for election fraud. And then, of course, as soon as Donald Trump won the election, what was everybody screaming? Oh, there had to be election fraud. There had to be election fraud. Americans love Hillary Clinton. We've got to have election fraud. And then everybody started saying, well, okay, let's look at the election system. And then we had the head of the ACLU came on out and said, don't look at the election system. It's very obvious our elections are fraudulent. Now, earlier in the week we reported on how China had cut off oil and gas sales to North Korea in compliance with the United Nations sanctions. Then late yesterday, the United States came on out and said that U.S. surveillance satellites caught China selling oil to North Korea. It was a big headline all over the corporate media. And basically, they were saying Chinese oil tankers doing illegal ship-to-ship transfers of oil with North Korean vessels. Well, China came back today and said, take a much closer look at those satellite photos because none of those ships have been in any Chinese harbors since before last August. Now, it's very reasonable and likely that North Korea is going to be buying oil and gas from anybody willing to sell it to them. And yes, it is illegal to do ship-to-ship transfers of oil and gas on the ocean because of the possibility of environmental damage. So we don't know who's doing the selling. But it was rather reckless to simply assume it was China or to demonize China. Now, a little while ago, Russia offered to act as a mediator between the United States and North Korea. And when they made that announcement, I said, no way would the United States go along with this because the United States still sees itself as the main guiding force for planet Earth. They're not going to be reduced to being a member at a negotiating table subordinate to another power. And I'm sorry to say my prediction turned out to be absolutely correct. The United States has rejected Russia's offer to act as a mediator. And they are apparently going back to their original attitude of you do what we tell you or bad things will happen to you. Now, getting on over into Syria, government forces liberated the villages of Ad-Dajjaj, Tamat al-Khalifa, and Musharifia, and basically the militant defenses have collapsed near Abu Dali as well. So again, it's a mop-up operation. The Syrian war is pretty much over. Syria won. Russia won. The U.S. is still stamping its feet on the ground, throwing tantrums, rather than admit that they have basically been defeated. They're trying to act like this is still a good thing. Donald Trump is trying to take credit for getting rid of ISIS and al-Qaeda in Syria, forgetting that it was the United States that put ISIS and al-Qaeda into Syria in the first place, armed them, trained them, supported them, and it was Russia and Syria who got ISIS and al-Qaeda out of Syria. Now, Syria has basically come back against Erdogan's claims that Assad is a terrorist. Erdogan had come on out saying, I clearly want to say Assad is a terrorist who leads state terror, and there will be no peace in Syria now and won't be with Assad. And the Syrian Foreign Ministry did not take the claim lightly and hit back at the Muslim Brotherhood sympathetic Turkish president. So presidents who live in glass palaces shouldn't be throwing stones here. Putin is once again saying that the U.S. is only pretending to fight Islamic State in Iraq, saying that every time the United States is in a position to actually strike at ISIS, they pull back or they divert, basically to allow militants to enter Syria from Iraq and fight the Russians-backed Syrian army. And he's absolutely right. The U.S. still has bases all over Syria. Apparently these bases are being used as training camps for ISIS and al-Qaeda. It is a duplicitous war, but then all wars are duplicitous. All wars based on deception. Hiram Johnson once said, truth is the first casualty of war. He was absolutely correct. Now, Scott Ritter is out there responding to Nikki Haley's attempt to link Iran to missiles fired from Yemen into Saudi Arabia. And basically, Nikki Haley declared that the missiles were an Iranian-made Qiyam-1 missile, range of 800 kilometers. Haley was parroting the claims of the Saudi Arabian government, which was trying to rope Iran into all of this. But looking at the actual wreckage that was put on display, it's not an Iranian-manufactured Qiyam-1. It is a modified Soviet-manufactured Scud-B missile. The airframe and engine are original Soviet-made components. Many of them still bear Cyrillic markings. What Yemen has done is they lengthened the rocket and enlarged the fuel tanks and enlarged the feed lines so it has more fuel for a longer range. They're also giving it a slightly lighter warhead to get it that added range. But again, we got lied to. Remember when there was that incident where a South Korean ship, the Cheosan, was sunk, and everybody said, oh, it was North Korea, had to be North Korea, couldn't be anybody else. And they fished up wreckage of a torpedo from the bottom of the ocean where the Cheosan sank, and they put it on display with a blueprint of North Korea's standard design torpedo. And observant people looking at the remains of the torpedo and looking at the blueprint immediately realized it was a different weapon, that it did not come from North Korea. In fact, it appeared to be a German design made for export. So trying to lie you into more wars here. Apparently there's been another rocket attack from somebody in Gaza toward Israel. 3 rockets were fired. 2 were intercepted by Iron Dome. 1 hit a building. Nobody was hurt. And Israel has, of course, launched a massive attack into Gaza following this probably false flag provocation. Now, everybody is still reacting to Donald Trump's announcement that he recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And, of course, the Palestinians are very angry and upset, and they're trying to find some way to shut them up, and the Palestinians will not shut up. So they finally reverted back to form, and they're screaming that the Palestinian reaction to Trump's announcement is just anti-Semitism. It's just Jew hatred. That's the only reason they could possibly be objecting. Well, the Palestinians are objecting for a very simple reason. They see Palestine as the capital of their country in formation, and the United Nations recognize that in the partition plan. But if they don't have any other argument, oh, you're just being an anti-Semite. Except they've burned it out. They've used it so much, nobody really cares anymore. Amy Goodman over on Democracy Now! Interviewed a former member of the Knesset, and this member of the Knesset came on out and admitted it's just a trick. It's just a trick to get people to shut up, to call them an anti-Semite. But they've used it way too many times. They've gone to that well too many times. And it's lost its shock value. 15, 20 years ago, if somebody called you an anti-Semite, oh, please, no, here, have some money, take my children for your wars, I'm not an anti-Semite. And today, somebody comes up and says you're an anti-Semite, and the reaction is, you say so. Nobody cares anymore. They've heard it way too many times. Now, as you know, the U.S. arming of the Western Pacific is causing concern. There was the issue with the THAAD missile defense system going into South Korea. And apparently the United States is now deploying what is called Aegis Ashore missile defense systems in Japan. And Russia is warning that this will probably affect ties with Japan. Now, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Aegis, we hear about the Aegis ships. Aegis by itself is the missile defense system. The Spy-1 radar system, the targeting radars, and the missile launchers. It's currently fitted on 2 U.S. ships, the Ticonderoga class and the Arleigh Burke class. But they have also built an Aegis system that doesn't require a ship around it. It just sits on the ground, hence the name Aegis Ashore. And it was actually derived from some Aegis land-based test and evaluation centers built along the east coast of the United States. In places like New Jersey, what's nicknamed the cruiser in the cornfield. And they were also involved in the exercise that resulted in the accidental shoot-down of TWA 800. But this is now a system that is being deployed to other countries. Speaking of the Ticonderoga class missile cruisers, apparently there's been a bit of a goof. The Ticonderoga class missile cruiser USS Lake Champlain collided with a 60-foot fishing vessel near Korea. And this time they avoided this idea, oh, it's an attack, blah, blah, blah. And they basically came out and said it was shoddy seamanship. And the collision occurred because they had an inexperienced bridge team that failed to follow safe navigational practices and take proper actions to avoid collisions. And apparently part of the problem was that awareness of the Korean fishing vessel was inconsistent due to poor radar operation and backup radar equipment that wasn't working. Now, keep in mind the Korean fishing vessel has less than half the top speed of the Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser. And one more time, this goes on back to what is called right-of-way. When you are in command of a vessel on the ocean and you are approaching other traffic, there is an internationally accepted set of rules as to who gets to go first. The very top of the pecking order are those giant supercargo ships and supertankers because they cannot stop or maneuver very well. Lower down on the list, you have sailing vessels under sail because they have to play to the wind. They are also less maneuverable. And then underneath that, you have all the other powered ships that are out there and who gets the right of way and who does not. And in all of these Navy collisions, it seems to come on out that these bridge crews are ignorant of the right-of-way or somehow think their position is elevated because they're a U.S. warship. Now, let's talk about the economy for a little bit. As you know, people are still trying to evaluate what's going to happen with the Trump tax plan. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Nobody questions it's going to be very good for large corporations and for the very wealthy individuals. The arguments are all hovering about what will be the real-world effect on the middle and working-class American, and the opinions for that are basically all over the place. Now, one of the reasons that Trump was pushing this tax plan was to re-incentivize American companies to bring their manufacturing back to the United States of America, which is definitely an objective that we should be looking at. But other countries are already starting to fight back. China is now offering tax incentives to U.S. companies working in China to stay there, to basically nullify the effect of the Trump tax plan. So we've got this little bit of economic war going there. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Tony in Puerto Rico, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Mike. I hope everything is fine with your wife, Claire. I hope she's getting better. And I just want to say Happy New Year to you and Claire also.
Well, thank you.
And, okay, my question is this, for New Year resolution for Donald Trump. I hope next year, okay, he fights a war on diseases like cancer, diabetes, etc., instead of fighting foreign wars for other people, natural resources. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a good resolution. It's not going to happen. Nobody in the medical industrial complex wants a cure for cancer or a cure for diabetes or a cure for AIDS. They just want more treatments. Curing a disease is a bad business model to the medical industrial complex, and so it's not going to happen. What I would like to see, if I could suggest a resolution to Donald Trump, is that he spend these next 3 years keeping the campaign promises he made to his supporters. Chief among them, pulling back on all these foreign interventions and putting the corrupt members of our government in prison where they richly deserve to be. But I'm not holding my breath. Okay? All right, well, I guess he hung up. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. When we come on back, we're going to do some more news about the economy on this, our final broadcast day of 2017. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here, and getting into the economic news here. A lot of stores going out of business, and it's amazing considering how earlier in the week we were being told it was a wonderful holiday shopping season, and everybody borrowed and spent like there was no tomorrow. But apparently Poundland and Benson's for bed stores are on the rack. Their owner has run out of cash, and Moody's has downgraded the firm's bonds to junk status. I think we're going to see more of that as we get into the end of January, beginning of February, and the real final numbers on the holiday shopping season are tallied up. One aspect people aren't talking about is all the returned gifts and how much that's going to knock down total revenues generated. And it also begs the question, what do they do with all those returned gifts? I mean, in some cases, they can obviously close up the packaging and put them back out on the shelves for the January sales, but not all. What a huge amount of waste that is. Anyway, we mentioned this briefly yesterday, but I'm going to mention it again. According to Joseph E. Gagnon, U.S. liabilities to foreigners exceed its assets by about $8 trillion with a T dollars. And Gagnon says, never in history has one country owed so much to the rest of the world. And it is a shock for people of my age, because when I was young, prior to Reagan, the United States was a very wealthy nation. We were the world's largest creditor nation. Everybody owed us money. And then we got into the Strategic Defense Initiative, and the 12 years of Reagan-Bush Sr. took us from being the world's largest creditor nation to the world's largest debtor nation. It happened so fast it almost looked like it was intentional. I don't think it was, but you have to wonder, how could we have fallen so far so rapidly? One answer obviously is the huge amounts of spending that went into the Star Wars project, which really did not yield much of anything usable. It just made the defense contractors and their pet Congress critters incredibly rich. Now, Andy Lippo, president of Lippo Oil Associates, in an interview with Russia Today, is saying that oil prices are going to increase in 2018 because global demand is rising and economies around the world are growing and they need more oil and gas. So that harebrained oil price war that the U.S. launched against Russia, which actually caused a lot more damage to places like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, Canada, even U.S. oil companies, didn't work, did it? People are still talking about that video and photographs, Skid Row 2017. And so there's another article about that over in The Guardian. Human tragedy. L.A. homelessness jumps to record-breaking levels. More about this when we come back from station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking about homelessness in Los Angeles. Hardly the only place dealing with this problem. And apparently homelessness has hit a new record in Los Angeles. Apparently there was a recent count done in a survey area comprising most of Los Angeles County, found 55,188 homeless people. And I suspect they probably didn't find them all. 55,000 homeless people in Los Angeles County. And city officials are trying to grapple with what is a humanitarian crisis in the middle of the United States of America. Apparently over in New York City, their homeless services reported 60,252 homeless people, up 200 just in the last 2 weeks. And people are saying that the city's program to combat homelessness isn't working. Yeah, it isn't. Record number of homeless kids attend city schools this year, research shows. And homeless students jump over 5% in Oregon, set a new record high. Well, let's call it what it is. It is a humanitarian crisis. So where is the United Nations? It's always willing to stick its nose into other countries on the basis of a humanitarian crisis. There's a humanitarian crisis going on in Yemen, but we've got a humanitarian crisis going on in our own country. And you cannot look at these numbers. 55,000 Los Angeles, 60,000 here, there, and everywhere. And that's just where they're counting in the big cities. A lot of homeless in a lot of smaller places as well. Here on the island of Oahu, we're a little tiny place. Look it up in Google Earth. We're a little tiny piece of rock in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. We have 8,000 homeless people here. You cannot look at those numbers and say that this is a working economy. And you can't just make excuses and just blame the homeless and say, oh, they're lazy, or they're gaming the system, or they're all druggies, or all the rest of it. No. The reality is your average human being, if there is work available and a place that they can rent or preferably buy, that they're going to go that way. Nobody chooses to be living in their cars or living on the streets. It doesn't work that way. This is an economy that has pandered to the rich, to the money junkies, at the expense of the ordinary American people, and shows every signs of continuing to do so. All right, let's take a phone call. George in Hawaii. Aloha, brah. What's up? George, are you there? Okay, I guess we lost George. All right. Now, getting on back here to the student debt problem. Basically, there's this article that came out of Ellen Brown's website about how education has been financialized, transformed from a public service into a lucrative cash cow for private investors. And basically saying it's just another form of slavery, that the debtors, or rather the creditors, may not claim chattel ownership over your body, but as long as you have that awareness of debt, you're going to do what collectively they want you to do. And it's made all the more shameful by the fact that the quality of the education these kids are getting for all of that money is very much in decay, in decline. It's not even education anymore, it's indoctrination, mostly in the liberal agenda. Humans are warming the earth. Immigration is good. And far from being places where young people are allowed to explore new ideas for the future of the country, the colleges and universities in this country have become the most rigid defenders of the status quo. And for all their talk out there about how we should all be tolerant and understanding and accepting of other people like the gays and so forth and so on, the liberal snowflakes on the university campuses are incredibly intolerant of anybody who's got a slightly different idea. All right, we're going to take another phone call here. John, I don't have a location where you're calling from, but what is on your mind? John, are you there? I'm having a problem. I'm not hearing my callers. I couldn't hear George in Hawaii, and I can't hear John. Okay. All right, we've got George in Hawaii. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Mike, beautiful day in Hawaii, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, actually.
Good. Hey, listen, Mike, you hit it right on the head, and you're usually very good about your commentary. Go back and look at the Reagan tax cut. Go back and look at 15, 18 years of war, and look at where we're at today. We're doing the same thing. Tax cuts for the wealthy, and the poor people get nailed. Yes. So here we have a situation where about 1% of the population function as complete socialist. They live at the top, they eat for free, and they do very, very well, just like they do in Russia. And the rest of us, the 99%ers, we function as capitalists. And we feed that system. We feed the military-industrial complex, and we feed Washington. That's what we do. And I think once we get to understanding that disparity between the rich and the poor is causing a lot of disconnection, I think once we get to understand that, and that you really don't cut taxes on the poorest people, you really don't impose new taxes on the poorest people, you just kind of bleed it off of the rich people. You just kind of take it away very subtly from the corporations, but you don't hammer the people that are already getting nailed. And so we see people rushing to the tax office trying to get their property tax paid in advance of this new tax bill. And I'm just sitting here wondering, this is the biggest tax cut since Ronald Reagan. And we know what happened after Reagan, Mike.
Yes.
You talked about that. You talked about that. You cannot build a military, expand the industrial base of your country, and cut taxes. It does not work. It's never worked. Reagan talked about a 600 fleet navy. It was a wonderful idea, but you can't do it on the backs of people who are not paying taxes. And the poor people are strapped. We cannot pay our property tax. We cannot pay our GET here, which for the people in the real world, that's our sales tax in Hawaii.
Yes.
We cannot pay that, or we barely can. And it's just an ugly situation. And then you add to that 15, 16, 17 years of war and a swamp, and you figure it out. But there are people, Mike, there are top feeders in this society that are not capitalist. They're socialist. And they love it just the way it is. The rest of us, we function like beautiful, all-American capitalists. We pay our taxes, and we muddle along day in and day out. And with that, Michael, Happy New Year, best to Claire, and I'm happy you live Hawaii.
Well, thank you very much, and Happy New Year to you. I disagree with you only on one point, and that is the people at the very top of our system are not living as socialists, they're living as fascists. And if you go back to my definition, capitalism is a system in which if you make money, you get to keep it. If you lose money, you are responsible for the debt, because freedom means the freedom to fail along with the freedom to succeed and the responsibility to accept either outcome. In socialism, if you make money, it's taxed off for the benefit of society. If you lose money, society is taxed to cover the losses so you can pick up and start again. Under fascism, those who make money get to keep it as long as they're sharing a bit of it with the political leadership. But if they lose money, society is taxed to cover the losses. And that's the system this country has been in for years now. Look at all of these Wall Street bailouts. Every time one of these Wall Street idiots makes a mistake or commits a crime, what do? Well, they don't dip into their pockets. They go on out and say, we need another taxpayer-funded bailout. And they're already talking about, will there be bailouts for Bitcoin? Will there be bailouts for what on else? If you need to be bailed out, it's time for you to go out of business. And probably that would have been the smart thing to do.
Mike, I'm with you. I'm with you 100%. You know what I want to do?
What?
I want to live like Putin and the oligarchs in Russia. That's what I want. I want to live in that kind of society. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
I don't know. I've never imagined myself living like that, to be very honest. I mean, like most Americans.
That's what we're doing, Mike.
I just want,
that's what we're doing here.
You mean living at the lower level?
That's what we're doing.
Well, first of all, Putin got rid of the oligarchs left over from the old Soviet Union, and most of them split for Israel. But basically, a society cannot become this stratified and survive. Again, the issue is that you have to have a recycling mechanism where the wealth that accumulates at the top has to get brought back down to the bottom as decent wages and salaries so that workers can trade their labor and their skills for that money and then pump it back into the system to keep it all going. And under capitalism and socialism especially, you have that recycling mechanism. Under fascism, you don't. The money just continues to collect and collect and collect at the top until there is simply insufficient currency in circulation and the entire economy locks up.
Now, Mike, did I hear you say bail out Bitcoin?
There's been some discussion about whether or not there would be a bailout for Bitcoin if it were to crash.
Well, Mike, that would be the ultimate slap in the face of every American who's tried to work for a living as they create money out of air. Now, we do that anyway.
That's true for every single bailout, going all the way back to the savings and loan bailout under George Herbert Walker Bush. It is a slap in the face of Americans to go on out to people who don't have investment capital, don't have risk capital, and ask them to pick up the losses for the investment class citizen who does have that money to risk and lose.
Well, Mike, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to agree with you on the fascist part of it.
Yes.
Although I know that's the other extreme of socialism. But the consequences are the same. It's disproportionality between the rich and the poor. Whether it be you can give it any name you want, but we know what's happening, Michael. The poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer, and there's less and less rich and more poor, and the disconnect is greater and greater. And we just continue down this road, and it's not going to end nicely. It's just not going to end nicely.
No, it isn't.
But again, beautiful day. Get out and enjoy it.
Well,
get out and enjoy the day. It's great here.
Certainly will.
Okay,
but once the radio show's over, I'm going back to taking care of Claire. Basically, I view that socialism and fascism are, in fact, direct opposites of each other. But it doesn't really matter. Any system, whether it's socialist, fascist, or capitalist, you're going to get wealth inequality as long as the political leadership is willing to allow itself to be bought by the people with the money. And the Founding Fathers set up the United States with a whole bunch of controls and limits and checks and balances to try and delay that inevitable decline. And here we are all these centuries later, and we are there. And even Thomas Jefferson didn't expect the United States that he created was going to last more than 100 years. because of the inevitable nature of political power and the people who seek that political power. And they're not really there.
I would agree with you.
Okay.
I would agree with you. We are very long in the tooth as a nation, very, very old as a democracy, and probably in the final last breaths that we're probably going to take as a democracy, as we know it, as you and I know it, as children, when we were children. Now we're both 70 or getting close, so what's the difference? But I always like listening to you, Mike. I really enjoy your show. Thank you so much.
Very much. Have a Happy New Year. We're going to let you go.
Happy New Year.
We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates rejoining our network, and we're going to go to Francis in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you both.
Aloha, Snack Bar.
Snack Bar, too. I'm wondering about one thing. When you mentioned about the homeless and the UN and so forth ad nauseum, the impression I got is that the UN should be stepping into the U.S. to help those that are homeless, that are in a pickle situation, shall we say, or did I misinterpret it from you, or what was your definition of that?
Well, it's obvious that this government is unwilling to do anything about the homeless and hungry in this country. Plenty of money for the refugees, plenty of money for the illegal immigrants who are all going to vote Democratic, but nothing for the American homeless. Now, I've always considered it a crime by the United States government to give a single penny of our tax money to any other country on earth while we have American citizens sleeping in alleys and eating out of trash dumpsters. And yet, that's exactly what's going on. So we do have a humanitarian disaster in our midst, and we need to start describing it as that to try and get some help to these people. And if the U.S. government isn't going to do it, and ordinary citizens simply can't come up with enough money and food. I mean, a lot of people are involved in the homeless and hungry programs, but it's not good enough. Maybe it's time for some kind of an international effort to feed America's hungry. It's sort of weird. We see all these commercials, especially around the holidays, where they're asking for donations to feed the hungry children of some third world nation over there in Africa. But we've got hungry children right here. And maybe these commercials are just propaganda to convince you that things are a lot worse in the rest of the world, and so don't complain about what you're seeing right in front of you, but I'm not going to go with that. We have hungry children in this country. We have people who are homeless and hungry through no fault of their own because they're victims of out-of-control greed and money junkie behavior by Wall Street or just a run of bad luck, and something has to be done for them.
Well, the reason why I was asking is because, for one thing, yes, I see those ads about, this child is missing this or missing that and so forth ad nauseum. It's basically heart-wrenching and deplorable. And, yes, what the U.S. government, or I should say the agencies thereof, are doing is absolutely disgusting and very indignant for that matter. Now, if they were to utilize the fundage that both Hollywood and the Federal Reserve are spitting out towards that end, like, okay, there's so-called a national debt of trillions of dollars. You know what? They could take care of that in a heartbeat, and it would be done and over with, and they could actually take care of the infrastructure and the people that are called homeless and all that do not have food to eat that is decent and not been genetically screwed with, for that matter, excuse my French, for that matter, to help them. But the reason why I ask that is because I hear a lot of people make the comment, well, this is the U.S. We don't need to have the UN coming in and trying to take control of what we do here in the U.S. and as far as the states are concerned. And I'm thinking, you know what? Who is kidding who? You either get help or you do what you have to correct things here in the U.S. states to start with, whether it's on the state, local level, or with the federal government. Take your pick. But when it comes right down to it, when you start asking for help from the UN, who's kidding who? And be careful what you ask for because it may not be what you think.
Well, maybe not the United Nations, but maybe it's time for some of these other nations that the U.S. has shown charity to over hundreds of years, to reverse that now and start saying we need humanitarian aid sent into our major cities to take care of these people. And I know that the politicians don't want that. It's embarrassing and humiliating. It's holding up the failures of our system for global ridicule, but maybe it's time for that to start happening. When you look at these numbers, I mean, if somebody says, well, there's 20 or 30 homeless, and you say, well, okay, fine. But when you're talking 60,000 homeless, or 50,000 homeless, or here on Oahu, 8,000 homeless, and all our government does here is just try and keep them shooed away from the tourist areas. And that's about the extent of it. That's an insult. It is.
And another aspect that's insulting is the fact that how much is spent in the medical industrial complex, the military industrial complex, that can actually be spent on the infrastructure to keep people from starving.
Well, if you look at all the government waste, if they could just get that under control, we could buy housing for all these people. We have to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Francis. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And again, for those of you who would like to help Republic Broadcasting stay on the air, the postal address to send a check or money order is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number, if you wish to become a recurring subscriber to Republic Broadcasting, is 800-724-2719, extension 03. And apparently, over at Judicial Watch, they're starting to pour through those posted emails being put up. And did you notice the State Department puts them up on the Friday before New Year's? They're kind of hoping that by next Tuesday, after all the fireworks and the hangovers and parades and football games, that people just won't have that much of an interest. But apparently it's already been confirmed that Anthony Weiner had classified emails belonging to Huma Abedin on that laptop. And they should not have been there. Title 18 violation. So we'll see what's happening going into the new year. And I'm hoping the new year is going to bring some prosecutions. All it's going to take is one felony conviction to guarantee that Hillary Clinton cannot run in 2020. Just one. Just one. Now, yesterday, actually on Tuesday, Bitcoin actually surged to 16,000. They called it the Boxing Day bounce back. But people are starting to say that they're very concerned because Bitcoin is being monopolized by the investment class. We know that a very small number of individuals are actually holding huge amounts of Bitcoin. And they're people who also have stocks and bonds. And so now the word is going on out that an implosion in Bitcoin could spill over into the stock market itself. And this is the reason why they're already starting to talk about a potential bailout on that. Now, Bitcoin is being traded and valued based on supply and demand. And my concern about Bitcoin is it has no commodity base under it to support whatever value is assigned to it. It could, in theory, go all the way to zero. And it is very volatile, as we have seen so far this year. That's what makes it attractive, because most of the people playing on Wall Street aren't there for long-term investments. The way Wall Street was originally set up was you would go in, you would invest in a company, and you would just hang on to that stock certificate until the company turned a profit, at which you would get a share of it. That was the mature way to invest your money. But the operators on Wall Street, they want to buy and sell. Buy in the morning, sell in the afternoon, riding the spikes and the grooves in that price, ride the straddle. And they love volatility. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're hopping onto Bitcoin, is it's probably the best roller coaster in that open-air casino over there in New York. Social Security beneficiaries have hit a record of 61,859,250. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics is already out there saying they're approaching a problem because for every one Social Security beneficiary, there's only little over two full-time workers. And of course, that's not the way that it was supposed to work. When Social Security was set up, the government would take the money from your paycheck, they would invest it for you, and then when you retired, you'd be paid from the dividends. But unfortunately, over the years, because the Social Security Trust Fund was used for several pork barrel projects that didn't pay back a return or profit, it's become another Ponzi, where today's Social Security beneficiaries are being paid from money taken from today's workers. And the Social Security Trust Fund is pretty much empty thanks to the Bill Clinton administration, which looted the cash buildup for the baby boomer retirements and spent it as general revenues. And that's embezzlement. They embezzled the American worker because that wasn't the government's money, that was your money. It was mismanaged. So, okay. Okay, more about Skid Row. Apparently, Emmanuel Macron has been blasted by his opponents over what is seen as an attack on the unemployed, where basically the French president wants to slash benefits for the jobless if they refuse what is considered a reasonable job offer. In other words, forget about finding work in the area that you trained for and had experience for. They're going to offer you a job sweeping the streets, and if you refuse, your benefits get cut. And I can understand why a lot of people are very upset with that, especially those who have worked to educate themselves or to develop a skill set. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We've got a caller waiting on the line as soon as we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go to the telephones. Curtis in Nevada. Aloha, Curtis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I'm not sure if I'm listening to you on my device, whether it was a comment you made today or yesterday, about us going from a creditor nation to a debtor nation. Was it today or yesterday?
Well, I mentioned it both days.
Oh, okay. Well, you said something about you don't think it was intentional, but quite frankly, I think it was spelled out pretty much in all the globalist documentation, starting from the end of World War II, that eventually our country was supposed to be used as a military arm to try to consolidate, the world like we've seen, but eventually we had to be made just as vulnerable as the rest of the world. And we had a manufacturing base. We had agricultural, we had the highest educational, medical. We were fully self-contained. So in all those decades, it takes decades to tear us down in that financially, economically, educational. They started infiltrating our schools and teaching in other words, everything was coordinated. Everything that you saw, the way they soiled our food, the way they pushed prescription drugs, they weakened us as a population, mentally, physically, everything to bring us to the point we're at now. So when people start calling and they start complaining, they're only seeing what they see last week, today, but I mean, these things were set up for decades. These people are just reacting to it, and that's why it was done. I mean, NAFTA and GATT and all those things, I mean, we saw that coming. Perot tried to warn us. But yes, that's why we're at where we're at today. And it was spelled out. I mean, if you saw, a lot of these Agenda 21 social warriors started infiltrating our school, BTAs and all that. And now to the point where they have everything just about across the country is pretty much uniform, kind of like, everything standardized. So yeah, it was intentional. We just weren't paying attention because most people just react to the present. They don't look ahead. That's what I think I saw.
Well, again, we have to realize that yes, there's a globalist movement, but it's an oversimplification to simply say everything that we're going through is a result of the globalists. because there are competing groups with competing agendas. Certainly the globalists are behind the open borders area, but I don't think they want the U.S. to collapse quite this soon, or they lose that military arm that, as you point out, they need the U.S. military to basically conquer the military of these other major countries that don't want to be part of the New World Order, such as Russia and China.
Yeah, well, I think Russia and China. I don't think there's any one of these countries that I can actually say they're good guys or bad guys, or they're all just players playing their part. At this point, I cannot trust even Trump. I don't know. Is this guy a white hat, or is he a black hat playing white hat just for now? Anyway, I just wanted to kind of like ask you, have you seen that list of CEOs that have either resigning or retiring as of like September of this year until now? Have you seen that list?
Yes.
Okay, so, I mean, once again, when you look at the timing of how things happen, I mean, you can't say this is normal or this is just something is going on here, something actually, and I kind of like, I'm just thinking that from the time they started all leaving, you're looking at around October and November. That's when the bulk of them started to say that I'm out of here. And that's when Trump had his, indictments thing, and they knew it. And for some, maybe they're interconnected by some kind of networking, and they just said, I'm getting out of here. So that way I'm not going to be part of it.
Well, let's go back to Occam's razor and take a look at these CEOs who are stepping down and resigning. They're leaving their companies while the companies are still healthy. They get a nice little golden parachute as they head into retirement. And the reason we're seeing a sudden surge in these resignations or retirements is because they're looking forward and seeing that the economy is poised for a downturn, and they want to get out while the getting is still good. They want somebody else to be sitting in that center seat when things really start to go bad.
Maybe so, but some of these companies are not exactly like national companies. Some of them are internationally related. But don't you think maybe that executive order might have been a reaction to this, because this order is going to prevent these people from being able to leave, without being affected.
Well, which executive order are you talking about? You're not talking about the human rights abusers and corruption executive order, because if these CEOs haven't abused human rights and they can't be proven to be corrupt, then the executive order doesn't apply to them.
Well, see, we don't know that, Mike. We don't know that, because these people here, they obviously network in some way. And see, this could speak to that whole trafficking thing, where some of these people might be, connected with that, or even just the corruption thing. If they get, it's proven that they were doing things to enrich themselves illegally, they're going to be affected by that executive order. That's what I'm saying.
They'd be affected by the executive order. They'd also be subject to prosecution. But I think what we're seeing here is more a case of people who are basically trying to consolidate their own wealth and get it to a place of safety ahead of a tremendous economic upset. And I don't think the executive order is necessarily the catalyst of that. Anyway, Curtis, I got to let you go here. We're starting to run short on time, and I want to switch over to Al in Canada. Al, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Your last caller, the guy that was just on the phone.
Yes.
You almost made it sound, like it's a concerted conspiracy against the United States, and it's not. It's a conspiracy against humanity because of the money. It has really nothing to do with anyone in particular. It's just these people are just so greedy, and they just have one focus in mind, and that's to have everything for themselves.
Yes.
There isn't a group of people that go, you know what, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. They just happen to come together, on certain topics that, that they set forth for themselves. I mean, look at George Soros, and that, by the way, you blew me away like almost an hour ago when you came out with that 57,000 voting machines.
Yes.
That Soros bought up. I mean, you know what? That's crazy. That right there is crazy. Like I
agree.
It's a conspiracy. I mean, I actually went onto your website after you said that. I tried to call, but I couldn't get through. But I went onto your website and I'm looking for this. Like, holy crap! How does this happen? How do these individuals buy up basically everyone's vote?
Well, that's how they stay in power.
Why would that happen? But how can that happen, Mike? Those voting machines should belong to the people.
They should. Well, I don't think we should be using voting machines anyway. They've been proven to be wide open to fraud. I've already written an article on how we can have more honest elections. We need to go back to paper ballots. We need to have voter ID. We need to mark the voter with some kind of purple ink on the thumb so that they can't vote more than once. It is possible to have honest elections. The reason we don't have honest elections in this country is those who are in control don't want honest elections. Everybody who's holding high office, they're the beneficiaries of a crooked system. They're going to be the absolute last people to allow any challenge to that crooked system.
Yeah, exactly. But like getting back to my first point, I mean, one of the beauties of the United States was, you know, the lack of regulation and that sort of thing, where someone could just, you know, all of a sudden you come up with a great idea that everybody liked and make a whole bunch of money. And, you know, there's nothing, you yourself said that. There's nothing wrong with that. George Lucas and, you know, people like that.
Yeah, that's the correct, that's capitalism. That's the correct way to become wealthy. And we admire these people. Yeah. We admire these people.
Oh, yeah. But, you know, like a handful of sweaty dollars, which are loans at interest, is not capital. That's what people have to get their head around. That is the money supply that is in existence now. That is not capital. It's a loan.
Yes.
It's owed. Not to mention that it's owed, but there's more owing than is actually in circulation. It's a hard concept to get your head around, but capitalism doesn't exist any longer.
No, we've gone fascist.
Went out a long time ago.
No, we've gone down the path to economic fascism decades ago. And actually, we started 100 years ago with the founding of the Federal Reserve. And that is really the beginning, what I think is the true beginning of the decline of the United States of America. Because you're absolutely correct. The trap of all private central banking is the debt always exceeds the available money supply. And over time, this means the real hard assets of the nation, the land, the houses, the factories, wind up in the pockets of those bankers. And all that the people are left holding are bits of paper with colored ink on them that in the end are really not worth anything at all.
No, they're not. And like the very definition of bankruptcy is owing more than what you're worth at any given time.
Yes.
So the United States government doesn't own anything, do they?
No, they don't. But they're certainly out there taking other people's property. That's what that whole Bundy Ranch and Malheur Wildlife Sanctuary was about, was the government just acting like they can go on out and take that which does not belong to them. And then, certainly in the case of the Malheur Wildlife Refuge, turn around and lease out its mining rights.
So you're busy. You have more callers. Thanks a lot, Mike. I appreciate your time.
All right, well, thank you very much here.
I was going to say Merry Christmas. I'm sorry, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you, too, as well. We're going to switch over to Chris in Las Vegas. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you, Michael. I thought I'd add a little bit of information about the George Soros voting situation. And I discovered here in Las Vegas back in the last voting cycle that Soros had formed through his Tides Foundation, one of his financial venture arms, that they had created their own school to educate SEIU, the Purple People Eaters, in the skills needed to maintain and service voting machines. and then secured contracts with many of the major metropolitan areas around the nation through SEIU and their sweetheart deals with the locals to give them proprietary special access to the machines year-round. Now, having worked in the Nevada State Gaming Controls Enforcement Division for a period of time, I understand the dangers of having a political activist group and financial terrorists such as George Soros supposedly taking care of our voting machines, which gives them the special access needed to modify, encrypt, embed, or plant Trojans within the boards to make them actionable in special operating capacities that can be turned on or turned off with local or remote switches at will, like whenever the inspector shows up, to give the illusion that it's operating normally when it's absolutely fixed. And I've witnessed that myself first person back when I used to vote. I no longer vote, understanding that to be a trespass against our qualified elector capacity as American nationals and qualified electors. But this is a clear and present danger to the integrity of the voting system that we saw evidenced by the minuscule amount of blue states versus the massive amount of red states, totally rebuking the Hillary Clinton gang and her ilk in trying to fix the election, which fell famously on its flat face. So that's what I know about that very, very well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for all that information. And it is rather amazing that you look at the lackadaisical attitude surrounding our election process, where they're out there saying, oh, they don't have to have ID, they don't need this, we don't need to be keeping an eye on the machines. And you contrast that with the extreme care with which the gambling machines in Las Vegas are monitored and watched to make sure there is no cheating. And it almost sends this message that gambling integrity is important in this country while election integrity is not. But again, it's intentional. The people who are in power over us now are the beneficiaries of a rigged electoral system, and they don't want that to change, and they will not let it change. They'll fight tooth and nail. Look how hard they were trying to strike down the few remaining voter ID laws across the country last year. They want just to be able to bust people up and send them all on in to vote for the chosen candidate. Apparently, there's evidence in Alabama that people came from outside the state of Alabama and voted in that election. That's absolutely illegal. So it's a shame. And it's an embarrassment to the United States of America. We're supposed to be a republic with a democratically elected leadership, but that part has broken down. The leadership is simply selecting itself from among their own cronies. And they've had a real sweet run. They've all gotten very, very wealthy off of this. And now they're very nervous that the American people are waking up to it. Getting back to the news here, apparently China has started testing on a brand new hypersonic missile, the Dongfeng 17, which apparently can whiz right past the United States Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Missile. So, moving on here. Over in Sweden, boy, Sweden, I remember when I was a kid, Sweden was this wonderful place, and everybody wanted to visit there, and now because of the open borders and the immigration, coupled with a hyper-liberal government, it has really deteriorated. And apparently they're trying to deal with their rape crisis over there. And because there are so many impediments being put in the way of actually arresting and prosecuting and deporting the refugees, police decided instead to declare a female curfew, telling women do not go out alone at night. And of course there was an immediate backlash from the feminists. How dare you? All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And over in Europe, especially in Germany, things are really starting to show cracks in the European Union. Apparently, the Alternative for Democracy Party, the Eurosceptic Party, is concerned that German churches are being politicized, like in the Nazi era. That's their comparison, basically saying that the AFD sees collusion between these religious leaders and Chancellor Angela Merkel's government. And there's nothing really new about that. Government has used churches and religions as instruments of domestic social policy for a very, very long time. Yes, the Nazis did it. George Bush actually was trying to do it here with his faith-based initiatives program, where the government was going to give money to churches and have the churches implement these social programs. But along with that, of course, came influence over what was being preached from the pulpit. And so the clergy were no longer allowed to simply express their honest opinion on certain topics. They had to be very careful about what they were saying, or they could lose the money. The latest polls are showing an absolute lack in confidence that Merkel can form a new government before next Easter. Only a third of the German people think she can still pull it off. And meanwhile, according to another poll, Merkel, Seehofer, and Schulz have been named the worst German politicians of 2017. Almost 50% of Germans want Chancellor Merkel to step down. They want her to quit. And a lot of that has to do, there was an article in Der Spiegel basically saying that looking at the ruins of Merkelism, the Merkel era has been characterized by a deep yearning for stability. And instead, Angela Merkel has created a Germany that is very unstable, economically, and certainly with the pressures from the uncontrolled immigration and refugee problems. People are very concerned. The Germany that they have grown up with, the Germany that they love, is being erased before their very eyes by this New World Order open borders policy. Now, as you know, Martin Schulz is one of the voices out there calling for a United States of Europe. In other words, for all of the EU to become completely federalized under Brussels, and the member states lose what little remains of their individual sovereignty, kind of like what was done to this nation following the Civil War. But apparently, the latest poll by YouGov is basically saying, no, nobody in the EU likes this. In fact, only France, of the countries that were surveyed, only France had a majority saying they were in favor of a United States of Europe. Everybody else thinks it's a bad idea. And probably looking at what has become of the United States of America is acting as a discouragement there. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And getting into the news here, a lot of stuff going on here. Let's look at guns and gun control. And by the way, one of the members posted another message to whatreallyhappened.com about yet another case where a homeowner was able to thwart a robbery, stop it before it happened, using a legally owned firearm. So it's a good thing. But look at the cities where they have the strongest gun control. And it's not working. They have very high homicide rates, because the criminals are always going to have access to guns, and the law-abiding citizens are unable to defend themselves or to deter being attacked. The criminals with their guns are wandering around cities in which they know all of their potential victims cannot fight back. And we're seeing some of our cities turning into war zones, urban war zones. Baltimore has doubled Chicago's homicide rate in 2017. And, of course, the gun grabbers are out there saying, well, we just need more gun control laws. And people will point out places like Chicago and Baltimore and say that the laws aren't working. And the gun grabbers will say, well, yeah, those laws didn't work, but more laws will fix it. And they can't make that leap to understanding that when you disarm the law-abiding citizen, crime will run rampant, which is why I keep saying anti-gun is pro-crime. And the gun grabbers will say, well, you just trust in the police. trust in the police, they'll take care of you. That's what they're there for. No, they're not. They're there to write traffic tickets and civil forfeiture and all the rest of it. And in the latest embarrassment, apparently over in Massachusetts, there are 8,000 drug convictions that will now likely be thrown out because a former lab employee admitted that she was actually taking the drugs she was supposed to be testing. Cops would arrest somebody, they'd come on in. This lady would just enjoy the drugs, and then she'd write up a fictitious report. And apparently this is on top of another 21,000 criminal drug cases involving a different state chemist who was faking tests. It's amazing. It's just amazing. The police can't police themselves. What makes you think they could do anything for us out here? Now again, I think at this point we need to learn a lesson from prohibition. Prohibition does not work. Prohibition led to unparalleled crime and corruption in the United States of America. It literally reshaped our political system as the gangsters were able to buy their way into positions of power. And the same thing is happening all over again under drug prohibition, where those who traffic in cocaine and heroin are able to buy themselves into positions of extreme power. And they're not doing it because they like the American people and want to do what's right by them. So in the end, I think the United States ultimately will be forced to do what so many other countries have done, and that is to decriminalize drugs, take away the profit motive, make them legal. Yes, there are going to be people who are going to be dealing with addiction, but probably a lot fewer. Because probably most people, if they don't have some drug dealer offering free samples down by the schoolyard, aren't going to experiment with those drugs to begin with. That's certainly been the outcome in these other countries that decriminalized the drugs. The drug problem went down. Now, the Department of Homeland Security, our United States Department of Homeland Security, is expanding operations into more than 70 countries around the world. And I thought Donald Trump said we were no longer going to be the world's policeman. But apparently the DHS is out there trying to strengthen international security while preventing a terrorist attack, drug shipment, or human smuggling ring. The problem is that every time the Department of Homeland Security actually tests the security at the airports, it comes up abysmal. It's another huge waste of money. Vast sums of money disappearing into the system with no real tangible benefit coming back. Same thing with the NSA, same thing with CIA, same thing with FBI. They've all been turned into rackets. Now, there was an interesting article that came on out, and this is over Freedom's Phoenix, talking about the feminist threat to women and men. And they're talking about the current propaganda. This is from Paul Craig Roberts, by the way. They're putting out the current propaganda that somehow we men are encouraging abuse and violence against women, especially by other men who are in positions of power. And this article goes back to point out how these things are a matter of fashion, as I've said many times before, reminding us all that back when men were being gentlemen to women, opening the door for them, picking up the check, pulling out the chair for them, the feminists were complaining back then that we were disempowering women. In other words, there's no making these ladies happy. They just want to complain for the sake of complaining. They are part of that segment of our population that can only find meaning for their life by always finding something to complain about or be offended by. So when we were being nice to women, that was a bad thing. When men are being bad to women, that's a bad thing. There's no making them happy. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates, plural, who are just now rejoining the network. So let's talk a little bit about computers here, and let's talk about Apple, because the revelation that Apple has intentionally slowed down older iPhones is ricocheting around the world. Now, Apple is still trying to claim that the only reason they were doing that was to maximize battery lifespan so that your phone would last longer. I seriously doubt it, and nobody's buying that. And apparently, American iPhone users are very angry over this tampering with the iPhones, apparently in a bid to get you so disgusted with your old pokey smartphone that you'll rush right on out and buy a new $1,000 iPhone 10. But Apple has apologized over the handling of the slowdown, and to try and make it up to the owners of older phones, they have now slashed the price of a replacement battery from $79 to $29. Too little, too late. And apparently, Apple executives in France are actually looking at jail time. There's a French law regarding this kind of sabotage of a product by a corporation, and some of them could actually go to jail over that. And that might be something refreshing to start seeing CEOs of any company that sells a dangerous, defective, poorly made product actually get jail time out of it. I remember when I was a kid in grade school, and as part of our social studies, meaning our early exposure to propaganda, we were constantly told about how terrible life was in the Soviet Union, and they'd show photos of people driving obviously older cars and photos in their homes with obviously older appliances and saying, see, they can't afford anything new. That's how terrible life is in the Soviet Union. And as has been the case with so much else that we were taught about the Soviet Union, it was a misrepresentation, because in the Soviet Union, they understood that planned obsolescence and having to buy the same thing over and over and over and over again was ultimately bad for the general population and their economic well-being. And so in the old Soviet Union, factory managers were told to make products that would last a very long time. And that's why Soviet citizens were driving old cars. They didn't need to buy a new one. That's why they had an old refrigerator. They didn't need to buy a new one. And factory managers who produced defective products would get sent to prison, sent to the gulag. Here in this country, planned obsolescence has resulted in tremendous environmental damage, a population that is working as hard as they can just to stay where they are right now, to have a working smartphone, to have a working computer, to have a working car. But the business model is every 5 years a new car, every 5 years a new computer, every 3 to 5 years a new smartphone. And you go on out and you spend your money to do that, and you're still there with the car, the cell phone, and the laptop. You are not improving your standard of living. Now, as you know, there's been a lot of cyber crime, cyber warfare all over the world, a lot of it targeting Ukraine, which led to suspicions that this was Western hackers trying to learn as much about Russia computers for cyber attacks. And to sort of counter that propaganda, the Express over in Great Britain came on out saying it's Russian hackers using Ukraine as a training ground for an attack on Great Britain. I seriously doubt it. But I'm very, very angry that in the coming World War, even us non-combatants, even us civilians, we're in the war zone because of the computers in our home. Every home with a computer is part of the war zone. Article over in techrepublic.com reminding everybody here at the end of the year, after all the hacks, they're pointing out that people still seem to want to have simple, easy-to-remember passwords like admin and 123456. And that, of course, is extremely dangerous because in a brute force attack on your machine, those most commonly used passwords are going to be the very first ones spit into your login system. And in many of these major hacks that we've seen, it turned out that there were default passwords being used, where people got a router and didn't change the default password, or they were using very simple passwords, or in a couple of cases, no passwords at all, just completely unsecured data. And there seems to be this idea among computer users that computer hacking and computer crime, well, that hits the big boys. That hits people with a lot of money. No, these bots that are out there all over the net trying to feed out ransomware, they're not being selective. They're going after every single machine they can find because they're making money at it, huge amounts of money. Either ransom for ransomware or hijacking your computer as a Bitcoin miner. They're making vast amounts of money off of your machinery. And you need to take responsibility for your security, which means also taking responsibility for your privacy, because we know the government wants to break into our computers just to see what we're doing. They don't know that we're doing anything. There's no actual suspicion of a crime. They just feel that they want to peek just for their own comfort level. All of this a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Now, we talked about this earlier in the week, but we're going to come back to it. Apparently, Donald Trump is considering a rollback on the Deepwater Horizon regulations. And basically what it was, in the wake of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, it came on out that oil companies, drilling companies, were ignoring the few regulations that were out there. The Minerals Management Service, which is supposed to be the U.S. government agency overseeing mining and drilling and make sure that it is safe, wasn't doing their job. And there was an immediate rush to pass some new regulations to keep a tighter control over oil drilling. One regulation I wish they had put through, but they did not, was to mandate automatic acoustic blowout preventers on all the wells. Almost every other oil-producing country in the world requires them. These are automated systems that would hear the blowout before it could really get going and slam the valve shut. Not to be. But apparently the Wall Street Journal is reporting some of the changes include easing rules requiring the streaming of real-time data of oil production operations to facilities onshore, which allows regulators to see what's going on. Another rule that may be removed, it requires third-party inspectors of equipment, such as the blowout preventer, to receive certification by the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, which is the agency housed in the Interior Department to regulate oil drilling, along with the Minerals Management Service. So basically, Trump is caving into the oil companies. He's going to let them go back to being in charge of their own safety and security and equipment, and it didn't work the last time. But again, when you look at the behavior of these government agencies that are supposed to exercise oversight, they're not doing their job either. It's wide open out there. It's a wild, wild west of mineral exploitation. Okay, let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming. It is going to be a very cold weekend, or if you are in those northern climes, especially over to the East Coast, and you're planning on going out for parades or football games or Times Square at midnight, dress very warmly. They got 5 feet of snow in Erie, Pennsylvania, declared a state of emergency. The National Guard is on the streets. Apparently, down in over in Montreal, it's going to feel, wind chill factor, minus 42 degrees centigrade. That's actually colder than the ambient temperature at the North Pole. Now, International Falls, Minnesota, hit a daily record low of minus 36 degrees Fahrenheit, breaking the previous record that was set in 1924. That is very cold. Story coming out of Freedom's Phoenix again. Another Arctic blast poised to usher in 2018. And this frigid blast will reach the northern Great Plains on Saturday, then sweep southeastward over the balance of the New York days weekend. Now, the global warming people are out there trying to say, well, it's the polar vortex. Like, this is supposed to be happening outside the theories predicting human-caused global warming. yes, humans are warming the planet, but every once in a while there'll be a polar vortex. But it's a unique situation. No, it isn't. We had them the last 3 years running. They're just changing the names to try and make it look like we shouldn't pay attention to how cold it is getting. Story coming out of CNN, no less. New Year's Eve will be almost 40 degrees colder than usual. They're expecting a low of 11 degrees in Times Square with a wind chill of 0. Now, Russian solar scientists have created what appears to be so far the most accurate computer model of the sun. And it's based on the 11-year sunspot cycle, the 22-year magnetic cycle, plus the indications of longer period cycles we're only just now starting to see because we've only been able to study the sun scientifically for the last 100 years. And their latest simulations on their model are showing that 2030 will begin a solar cycle that will last 10 to 14 years of incredibly low sunspot activity, the lowest since the Maunder minimum, which was responsible for the Little Ice Age. Frankly, looking at all these cold weather reports going on, I think the Ice Age has already started. And we should take a moment here to remember all those climate change experts back in 2000, 1990, winters would be warmer and there'd be less snow because of human-caused global warming. In fact, March 20th, 2000, headline in the UK Independent, snowfalls are now a thing of the past. And this article went on about how older folks were going to have to just describe to children or show them photographs of what snow was like because it wouldn't be happening anymore. Actually, snow cover has continued to increase overall since the 1950s. And we have caught a lot of these global warming people fudging the data. Hadley Climate Research Unit, Penn State, NASA, NOAA, pushing the political agenda. Now, Donald Trump, of course, is taking advantage of this, and we'll have more about that after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about human-caused global warming and just how incredibly cold this winter is shaping up to be. So Donald Trump basically is looking at all these cold temperatures, and he's tweeting on out there saying, obviously we're justified in pulling out of that Paris Climate Accord. And what's really amazing is in the article that was talking about this in the Daily Mail, they felt obliged at the bottom to point out how climate experts are saying that human-caused global warming is the reason we're getting all this snow and ice. Back in 2000, global warming will mean less ice, less snow. And today it's, well, look at all the snow and ice. It's all the fault of human-caused global warming. Reminds me of the feminists. When you're being bad to women, that's bad. When you're being good to women, that's bad. You cannot make these people happy because they're pushing an agenda. It was a scam right from the very, very beginning. We live in a world of scams. Our entire government is nothing but scams and rackets. Speaking of which, over in California, they're working on a high-speed rail system, and the politician who used to be supporting it is out there saying it's almost a crime. The project's costs have ballooned to nearly $3.5 billion for each new mile of track. And it's another boondoggle. And we've got one right here in Hawaii, the light rail system. A year ago, I talked to some of the people from the light rail and said, when is the section down here at the bottom of our hill going to be done? Because the traffic is snarled up, all the construction, lane closures. And this was in December of last year. And they said, oh, it'll be on by February. And here we are, December of this year, and it's still there. And it's a huge cost. There's a public demand for a full audit of where all the money went. It's billions of dollars in cost overruns. They're already having to repair sections of the track as being deficient. They had a problem where the rail cars showed up with cracks in the frames, And because they were aluminum framed, aluminum body, it's actually cheaper to just build new cars than to try and fix the current ones. And it just, the list goes on. And one of the big problems they're dealing with right now is that the supports for the stations to get on and off the trains were contracted out and finalized before it was known how heavy the stations themselves were going to be. And now there's a concern those supports are going to have to be redone. This is your government on drugs. Now, a California-based nonprofit organization, Physicians for Informed Consent, they've been around for a long time, they do very, very good work. They reported in the British Medical Journal that every year in the United States, 5,700 children are driven into seizures by the MMR triple vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella. 5,700 kids driven into seizures by this shot. And what's really angering for a lot of parents is the single shots where you go and you get one shot for mumps, then you wait a little bit, you get another shot for measles, you wait a little bit, then you get the rubella shot. Those aren't even available anymore. The attitude is you're required to take this shot, and this is the shot we're going to give your kid, and yes, there's a small chance that your child will go into a seizure over it, but it's just maximizing profitability. They get all the money for 3 vaccines with the labor cost of 1 shot. And they're causing a lot of harm. Now, this flu that Claire and I had, I'm over it already. Claire is still, unfortunately, dealing with it. It turns out this year's flu shot was totally ineffective against it. So why are they still out there screaming everyone should get the flu shot? Because it makes money. Because it's making money. And that's what it's really all about. Our society has raised money to the top of the altar. And that's, people are driven to do whatever it takes to get money to keep the bankers happy, to which we all owe so much without our choice. And that's an important thing to remember. Wasn't all that long ago, you could, if you wanted, live your life without involving yourself with a bank. People were paid in cash. People would pay in cash. They'd save up to buy things. And today, our society, it's impossible to live without being in debt. And now with the cash-free society, the bankers want all of the money under their control. And it's rather amazing because none of it is their money. Well, they see it as their money, that they graciously loan to us at interest. We've descended into fascism, and if it keeps going, we're going to wind up in a feudalist society, the return of serfdom. And that is certainly not what was designed by the Founding Fathers. We're going to take another break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And once again, if you want to support Republic Broadcasting, keep us on the air. The postal address to send a check or money order is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, and that's in Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number, if you want to pledge to being a recurring subscriber to RBN, is 800-724-2719, extension 03. Meanwhile, our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're down to the last half hour of our last show for the year 2017. A lot of people talking about Amazon and the special deals that it gets with the U.S. Post Office, where the Post Office is actually losing money delivering Amazon packages. And everybody's wondering, how did this come about? And we know Amazon's an incredibly wealthy company. We know they're very abusive of their employees, and people are wondering, how do they get away with this? To become so large, who's protecting their operation? Who's protecting them from labor laws? And who was it who set up a deal where the post office is losing money delivering for Amazon at a time when the post office really can't afford to be losing any money anyway. Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Tom in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, first off, Michael, happy New Year to you. Hope 2018 is going to be a wonderful year. But, yeah, Mike, what's on my mind is what's going on. I don't know if you saw the report what's going on in Hungary, where the Hungarian government's basically telling George Soros and all those cronies, we don't need no more illegal Muslims coming in here. We're going to make our own women have children, and we're going to populate our own country with our own people. And the same thing Donald Trump should be thinking about here. $28 billion to bring in these DACA, the kids. $28 billion for 10 years, these kids, to support them. No, we need to start supporting our women to have our own kids in our country. The Northern Europeans, we don't need a bunch of third worlders coming here and then the anchor babies and all that nonsense. We got to take like the Hungarian government's getting ready to do. Start paying our own women, give them $25,000, $30,000 for each kid they have. That's what we need to start doing in the United States. We don't need to be importing another country's culture. We don't need that. We need to start taking care of Americans first.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And again, Donald Trump this year has been a disappointment in terms of implementing his promises of getting our borders under control. They're still arguing over the border wall. Trump is being forced to negotiate on amnesty for the existing dreamers. And of course, all of this is already a violation of Title VIII law in this country. And as I was mentioning earlier in the context of the absolutely shocking numbers of homeless in the streets of America, why is there all this tax money available for these refugees coming into this country and nothing available for American citizens who've lived and worked here all their lives? And there is something hideously out of synchronization when you look at this.
Yeah, Michael, it's absurd. And look at how the veterans, I know here in South Florida, you have veterans that are homeless, all living all over the place in cardboard boxes. You can go downtown Miami or Fort Lauderdale and see they're all homeless. It's disgraceful. And you're going to bring in a third world invasion in here, and they don't even know how to speak English. It's amazing to me what's happened here. And these Democrats that are running like that Schumer and all that, you know, that Chuck Schumer, you think he's actually working, he might as well be working for Israeli intelligence.
Yes.
I mean, they had this guy Weiner going to jail yesterday, Anthony Weiner. I'm still telling you that Weiner probably has stuff that he gave Israel to blow people's mind. And Abedin and all that nonsense. And here all we hear about Russia collusion with Trump. This is insane. But, Michael, I have to agree with you 100%. If Donald Trump caves in on DACA, which is their dream, it's our nightmare. It's what might be their dream. It's a nightmare for American public. If that happens, I tell you right now, Donald Trump's going to have a big time winning the next election.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump is on his way to being a single-term president. He's probably the biggest single disappointment of 2017. And again, I'll be very honest, the main reason I supported Donald Trump was I was opposed to Hillary Clinton being in that Oval Office. And I think had she gotten the Oval Office, things would be even worse than they are right now. But I'm sick and tired of always having to choose between the lesser of two evils every time there's a ballot box in front of me. And we look at some of these politicians who are out there, and we're asking, is this the best that our society can produce? And the answer is no. These are the very worst people that our society produces. People who are criminals, drug smugglers, gun runners, working with the CIA to overthrow other governments. And they've captured the political system in this country, and they've turned this into a new Tripoli, a new pirate kingdom. That is basically a nation that anchors global piracy. Yeah,
you're right, Michael. You're 100% right. Listen, they're talking about how Donald Trump has decimated ISIS, and that's a wonderful thing. And he got rid of ISIS. But look at all the gang members. Well, I don't know, but look at all the gang members we have here in the United States, Michael. L.A. alone, you have 100,000 illegal gang members. Chicago, New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia. I mean, all these cities are nothing but gangs. Detroit, it's a madhouse. And, I guess Trump is trying to do something with ISIS. I know he did more than Barry Soetoro, Hussein Obama. But I still say that, Trump he's got to put full throttle down. There's no way we're going to allow DACA. If he allows DACA, it's going to set a precedent. All these people is Democratic voters.
Yes.
And I'll tell you right now, Michael, crazy that guy Moore was in Georgia. They say all this. That was a stolen election. It was a totally stolen election on this guy Moore because 98% of Afro-American blacks came out and voted for this guy Jones. If the whites were to do that, or the media, they're a bunch of white racists. That's all you hear. But when 98% of the Afro-Americans can vote for their candidate, no problem because they're the one. Well, they're not the minority in a lot of areas. They're the majority. So that's another farce that media is perpetrating. But, this whole thing, we'll see how 2018 turns out. But I still say that if Trump goes with that, Michael, I'm in agreement with you. He's a one-term president. If he says he plays tough on that guy, he builds the wall, then I can say he's a two-term president. But we'll see how this plays out. It's going to be very interesting how this is going to be in the next month or two. And he's got a lot of rhinos and Republicans that are selling out. That lame brain insane McCain, they keep talking, he's a war hero. My father's in Korea. My uncle was in World War II. My grandfather's in World War I. Those are war heroes. Not John McCain, where he got caught and he starts stewing like a pigeon, and he's the greatest thing that ever came out of Vietnam and all that. Come on. What kind of media crap are these idiots trying to push on us?
Well, it's the same stuff they've been pushing for all of our lifetimes. The only difference is now we know what it really is. And Americans are waking up to the scale of the lies that we are surrounded with every single day. Lies by politicians and the media, it's not an occasional thing. It is an ongoing flood, a deluge, a tsunami. We are the most lied to people on the face of the earth. But we need to recognize that and start adjusting our perceptions accordingly. Again, there's Soros and his globalists who want a one-world government, and by looking at what they're doing in the areas where they're succeeding, you realize that one-world government will be a very strict fascist dictatorship. It'll have to be just to survive the circumstances of its own creation, because it is a government being created through fraud and underhanded means.
They'll be worse than the Nazis, Michael. You're 100% correct. They're the Bolsheviks. They're the new Bolsheviks. And what's going on with the United States is this media that we got are such. Look at how they have Mad Cow on there, Rachel Mad Cow. You got that Anderson Cooper and that other weirdo. All these weirdos they got. This guy Lemon. That's what we're all getting. There's a bunch of lemons anymore in our media. There are a bunch of lemons, and it's a lie. Hopefully it all gets exposed here real soon. It seems like slowly but surely it is.
Yeah, I think that's a note of hope going into 2018, is that the American people are waking up to what's going on. And more and more I've got people who come up to me and say, I read your website and I listen to your radio show, and, a few years ago I would have thought you were a nutcase, but it's obvious, this stuff is really going on. And again, I think the best possible outcome for the entire world would be a Soviet Union-style collapse of the U.S. Government, because that would not only pull the rug out from all the U.S. wars around the world, it would also pull the rug out from under the globalists, because without the U.S. military, they can't complete their plan, because China's not going to go along with it, Russia's not going to go along with it. More and more countries are basically pulling away from this idea of a one-world government, a one-world bank, a one-world currency. They can see that this whole plan is just for the benefit of the global elites and has got nothing to do with quality of life by ordinary people.
Well, you're absolutely right, Michael, and thank you for everything you do as far as waking up the American public, because believe me, since I've been listening, you woke up a lot of people. I let a lot of other people know what's going on, and they're listening to you. And people are waking up. I can tell you, everybody I get to talk to, they waking up and they know it's all phony, fake. It's a disgrace, and people woke up. That's what I can tell you. I think it's going to be like a major revolution here in 2018, where people are really going to wake up to this media, the government, how the cabal. I call it the cabal, and we'll see how it happens. It's really amazing what's going on, because people are waking up. And one more good thing: look at the Hungarian government. They have woke up to Soros and all this. This EU bullcrap where they're trying to perpetrate the white Northern Europeans and Hungary to accept all these Muslim invaders. And it's insane. There's no-go zones all over Europe, Paris and England and Germany. It's a madhouse. So look at the United States, same place. We got the same thing here in some of our cities. You can't even go in the city, you're going to get shot.
Yes.
So let's hope that it all turns out in the righteousness of how our country's founded. So that's all I can tell you. And like I said, Michael, have a great Happy New Year, and you and your staff.
Happy New Year to you as well. And we're going to switch over to Lenny in Los Angeles. Aloha, Lenny. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how you doing? Merry after Christmas and Happy New Year to be.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, first I want to speak to the caller who just got off. He just made a major mistake in saying that Trump got rid of ISIS. Trump didn't get rid of ISIS. It was Russia, Syria, Iraq, and Hezbollah. Yes, Hezbollah who got rid of ISIS in Syria, and they're still dealing with that in the sense that just today the Russian government, or yesterday the Russian government announced that they have proof that the U.S. is still lifting ISIS commanders out of northern Syria and shipping them to Afghanistan.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, you know, what's Trump going to do? Stand up there and say we lost in Syria? The war hawks are not going to like that. They want to keep the momentum going for the eventual war against Iran. And so basically Trump is out there taking credit for what Putin did and trying to make it look like we emerged victorious from Syria, even though the actual agenda in Syria, which was the replacement of Bashar al-Assad with a Western puppet, has not been achieved. But they're trying to convince you that we're still a great power and that we're still winning all over the world. And because Americans, by and large, are opposed to war, but they're a little bit more willing to go along with it if they think we're somehow victorious and on the side of the right. And so any war propaganda that you're going to see is pushing those two ideas. This war is morally right for our side to be on, and we are prevailing no matter how bad it may look like we're losing. We're actually still winning if you just spin it correctly.
Exactly. But some of us, know which way the spin is being spun. But another thing I want to speak to about the Hungarians, I say hooray for the Hungarians, hooray for the Poles, hooray for the Czechs, all of the Slavic and Eastern European countries who are starting to wake up. They're starting to wake up because of one man, and that is Vladimir Putin. And what you have, what this guy was going on about, this is what's called forced multiculturalism. Okay, forced multiculturalism. This is not the natural state of being for any species, which is monoculturalism. So what we're having now is a reject of something that's being forced, contrived, just because a few elite, demonic, possessed people have an agenda that they want to get rid of what creation has given. And they want to recreate it in their own image.
Yeah, what they want to do is they want to take all of the human population and blur them together to destroy any sense of cultural, regional, historical identity, because people who have a strong sense of who they are and their connection to where they live are much more difficult to control than people who are wandering around saying, I have no idea what's going on. There are all these different cultural references around me. And it's not just blending all the cultures together. The new artificially imposed cultures are being reinforced while the indigenous existing culture and history are under attack. And we're seeing all this talk about being tolerant to Muslims and tolerant to Jews. At the same time, Christianity is under attack. White people are under attack. We're seeing an attack on our own history, the teardown of all these Confederate monuments. And now they're even saying that the American flag is racist. And it's basically trying to disconnect the people from their cultural heritage in order to make them easier to push around.
Exactly. And we saw the same thing going on in Syria. When ISIS got there, what did they do? They started to destroy the history of Syria. What does that have in common with the monuments being destroyed here? Can't you? I'm talking to the gentleman in Florida who just called. Can't you see there's a bigger agenda? Find out who's behind all of this, go after that, and that may help cure your problem of the anger that you have.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Have a happy New Year. Okay. Getting back to the news. Sinabung volcano has erupted, sent an ash cloud 4.6 kilometers into the sky. Large pyroclastic flows are hurtling down the flanks. It's going to be a huge, huge eruption. The good news is, of course, that the area, the red zone, where the pyroclastic flows are headed, had already been evacuated by the government of Sumatra. So it's going to be spectacular, and there's going to be a lot of destruction, but fortunately they got the people out of the way just in time. Apparently they've had a little bit of a whoopsie over there in Russia. They were getting ready to launch a satellite from Russia's new Vostochny Cosmodrome in the country's far east. And they launched the rocket, and it promptly went the wrong way, and they discovered the reason was the rocket had originally been programmed for a launch from Baikonur, which Moscow leases from Kazakhstan. So the rocket thought it was someplace else on planet Earth when it was fired. These things do happen. There was a very famous incident where an Ariane 5 rocket exploded shortly after liftoff because it had had the software for the Ariane 4 loaded into it by mistake. All right, we're coming up here on our last commercial break of our last show of 2017. When we come on back, we're going to close out the program and have a few final closing thoughts to say. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program on this last broadcast for the year 2017. And again, a reminder, Monday's show will be a repeat, and we'll be back live on Tuesday. So looking back over 2017, it certainly started out as a year of promise. We had managed to keep Hillary Clinton from stealing the Oval Office, only to have Donald Trump, rather than drain the swamp as he promised to do, started hiring in the alligators to key White House positions, and that was his biggest mistake. Coming into the White House, he wanted to be generous and magnanimous in victory, and he kept a lot of the holdovers from the Obama administration, thinking that now that he was the boss, and in effect signing the paychecks, that the staffers in the White House, the administration, would be loyal to him. And that's usually the way it works in the world of business. It's not how it works in Washington, D.C. And looking back over the last year, I have to be very honest, I am very disappointed in Donald Trump. He's done a few things that I think benefit the nation and the people, but for the most part, it's been giveaways to the wealthy, giveaways to the elite, giveaways to Israel, a continuance of the war policy. I agreed with him pulling out of the global warming hoax, but that's just one or two things I agree with amidst a rather large bulk of things that I don't agree with. And the reality is, we, the American people, did not get the Donald Trump we voted for. We didn't get the Donald Trump who was campaigning last year. Again, nothing new with that. All politicians say all kinds of things we want to hear. I remember when Obama was running for his first term in office, and he was talking about how as soon as he was president, he was going to end the wars and bring all of our children back home. And that didn't happen. And maybe they're all just hoping that eventually we'll get used to the idea that we vote for the best talker or the best dressed every year and then accept the government that comes afterwards. But I'm not ready to do that, because this nation is supposed to be founded on the principle that those that we entrust with the nation's sovereignty, those that we entrust with power and authority over us, do so with our best interests in heart and with our permission and blessing. And in a year in which election fraud has already reared its ugly head yet again, I think it's important that we go into 2018 realizing that the United States is not the nation we all thought it was. It's not the nation we were taught that it was. That there's a very, very ugly reality behind all the spin and propaganda and public relations. And Americans, unfortunately, are going to have to stand up and take the responsibility of discovering for themselves just what this government has been doing around the world in our name and with our money, because it's not very pleasant. But it's not going to go away by people choosing to pretend it doesn't exist. The United States has become the new evil empire, and it is causing unimaginable amounts of harm and suffering around the globe. And I fear it's going to end very badly for the entire world, and yes, indeed, for the United States itself. I'm rather amazed that we haven't had a major escalation of the wars, but that could happen as soon as Sunday night, Monday morning. So anyway, here we are wrapping up for 2017. We're going into the holiday weekend, and again, if you're in the northern parts of the country, dress warmly. It is unusually cold for this time of year. Please drive safely. Do not drink and drive. Get a designated driver. Have yourselves a really good weekend. We'll see you on Tuesday. Aloha, America.